Welcome to the Peak Endurance Podcast. Episode 125 is an interview with Peter Defty. Peter is one of the pioneers in fat-adapted performance. This work, first on himself beginning in 2001 and subsequently with athletes he coached, eventually led to some stunning athletic performances, all based upon optimizing fat metabolism. Peter is the general manager of Vespa, and he's a nutrition expert and an ultra athlete who has developed a safe, healthy approach to fat adaptation for endurance athletes called Optimized Fat Metabolism, OFM for short. Peter got into running going from carb burner with poor results to a fat burner with success in racing. He competed in the Western States 100 among many other events and also coaches ultra runners on using fat as fuel. I hope you enjoy this episode, and if you do, would you be able to do me a favour and subscribe and write a review? You can do this here on YouTube or on the podcast platform that you listen on. It truly doesn't take much time, but it means so much to me. And not only does doing this help to boost the ratings of the show, it increases its audience reach, meaning more athletes like yourself get to listen. And it really makes my day reading the reviews. Are injuries or niggles ruining your enjoyment of running and hindering your performance? Get on top of these and see the specialists at Health and High Performance. Utilising the latest in technology and with a wealth of experience, the team at Health and High Performance can assist you with all your running injury and performance needs. So, to get back to enjoying your running and achieving the results you are capable of, head to healthhp.com.au/run or find them on Instagram, Health High Performance. Health and High Performance are located in Mont Albert, Melbourne, but are available for telehealth appointments not only Australia-wide, but also around the world. Contact them on their website to find out more. Wild Earth Australia are the online store to help you make the most of the outdoors with top quality gear at really great prices. Peak Endurance Podcast listeners can use the discount code Peak Endurance, one word and all capitals, to get 10% off at checkout. Head on over to wildearth.com.au to get everything you need for your next big adventure. Now, I have only limited coaching places available at the moment. If you are planning a race in 2022, now is the time to get started on your training, believe it or not. Although it seems a long way away, it is not. To secure a spot on Team Peak Endurance, email me, Isabel, at peakendurancecoaching.com.au, Isabel spelled with an O, to get the ball rolling. I really hope you enjoy this episode. I know I did. Hi, Peter, and welcome to the Peak Endurance Podcast.
Hey, Isabel. Welcome. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, no problems. Now, can you just tell the listeners a bit about yourself and you know, if you have some athletic background, maybe a little bit about that as well?
Okay. All right. For those of you who don't know who I am, which is probably the majority of you, I'm Peter Defty, and I'm sort of the unknown pioneer of fat adapted performance. I started doing this personally in 2000 after running my first marathon and doing the whole carb loading thing, and it didn't work for me. It just clearly my first attempt at using carbs didn't work. And that's what set me on my journey. And I just thought, oh, this doesn't work. And kind of thought about it from an evolutionary context, because I have a biology degree from UC Davis here in California, and started eating a lot more protein and fat with some carbs and ran 3 marathons right after that. And it's like, I had no trouble. It was just like easy peasy.
So what was the issues that you had after you'd carbo loaded? Why did you say it didn't
Well,
work?
I only did the carbo loading once, and it was just the mile 18, something I kind of noticed something was going on. Then dashboard lights were starting to blink. And by mile 23, it was like tunnel vision. And I was kind of like shuffling around. I knew that I stopped, I'd be in trouble. And I was actually on pace for a sub 3 hour marathon about mile 16, 17. And then, about 18, all of a sudden my pace started slowing down, and all my training had indicated I was capable of a sub 3 hour marathon.
Yeah.
And It's just, I finished the marathon, got a 3:14, was able to get a Boston qualifier, but it's just like that first time using carbs in the traditional conventional way just really made an impression on me, and it got me thinking. And I just thought, like, from an evolutionary standpoint, this just doesn't make sense. And so, like I said, I started adding a lot more protein, animal protein, and fat, and some carbs, but not carb loading per se. I guess it's plenty of carbs, but and that's what started me on my personal journey. And then I started running trails and ultras, and started coaching some of my friends who were struggling with the same sorts of things in the early 2000s. And then in 2006, I was getting ready for the Western States 100. I'd done several ultras between 2000, like I said, in 2001, 2002, I started getting into the ultra scene, and was doing this sort of fueling then, and then got into Western States after pacing and coaching several people to successful Western States finishes. And then a friend of mine handed me a couple of pouches, Kiwi Paul Charters from Australia, the guy who started the Tarawera 100K.
Okay. Yep.
Okay, Paul Charters.
Yep.
Anyway, he tossed me a couple of pouches of Vespa and said, "Hey, try these. My friend Mojo swears by them." And since I'd already been doing it, when I read the pouch on the back, it was all about burning fat, which in 2006, that's the time that carbs were king, right?
Yeah.
And so, but I was open to that idea because it was talking about fat metabolism. Since I was already open to the concept, I used it, and this was a month out from Western States. So I used it for Western States, and I didn't use nearly as much as I thought as I should have in hindsight, but I had a good run because that was the year it got super hot and only half the field finished, and it was carnage. And it was my first 100, and I had no trouble finishing under 24 hours in a year where only half the field finished and only a few people, less than 50 people, made it under the 24-hour standard for the silver buckle. And, I didn't know really what I was doing. So anyway, I got even more serious into that and started talking to the company, and became the distributor and point man for Vespa, and started marketing this. And I didn't know better because the fat thing was working for me. And then when I started as my day job, that's when I found out I didn't know anything, because people would talk, it's like when you looked at my first blog interview with Scott Dunlap, the comments, they just ripped us to shreds because I was talking about this whole idea of burning more fat and using less carbs. So that was where I got my rude awakening, but I knew it worked for me. And I had some early adopters, people who were having serious GI issues. A guy named John Olson, another gal named Jenny Capel. These were high level ultra runners, but they were plagued by stomach issues. And John went on to win the IAU 24-hour world championship in 2014. And he was the first American to run under 12 hours. And, really successful. And then Zach Bitter, who was working with me at the time, went on to break the 100-mile record. But it was, I started working with people, and so got these early adopters who were having serious GI issues on board because they'd run out of options trying to do it the conventional way. And, I was developing the market for Vespa and this whole idea of fat adaptation. And then in 2010, a friend of mine put me in touch with Steve Finney, and we had lunch, and that started something because Steve had always had this, he was focused on diabetes and low carb diet, but he always had this passion for athletic performance based on fat burning.
Yeah.
And so we started talking, and I told him about all his athletes. So I became a reviewer and editor for his books, The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Living and Performance. And he profiled me and some of my athletes in the performance book. And then in 2012, they did a study on some of my athletes at the 2012 Western States. And one of the guys I was working with actually won it that year and set a course record that year. It's been broken since, but they never published that data, but that data so compelled them that they did the FASTER study using athletes of mine in 2013 and 14, and it published in 2015. And that's you're familiar with the FASTER study, and we can
Yes,
provide links.
and I've actually got that book. So yes,
Yeah.
I know.
So for the audience in the context, all these low carb diet cohort in the FASTER study, I had personally coached and helped get themselves fat adapted. People like Zach Bitter, Ben Greenfield, John Rutherford, who was one of my early adopters, who was the highest recorded. I think he burned 1.78 grams per minute.
Wow.
And since then, Jeff Browning's been recorded at 2.22 grams a minute peak fat oxidation. And that's using Vespa. In the FASTER study, they weren't using Vespa, but for the audience to know, for context, prior to the FASTER study, the science suggested that humans could only burn up to 1 gram a minute of fat. And most athletes burn between 0.5 gram and 0.75 gram. And then we have the crossover, the famous George Book's crossover, where a conditioned athlete would cross over from burning fat to carbohydrates at 65% of their VO2 max. Well, FASTER smashed all that because the mean for the low carb diet cohort was 1.54 grams a minute. So 0.5 gram a minute above the what was thought to be the absolute ceiling, the science said. And then the crossover shifted to 75 to 80% of VO2 max. So for endurance, those are both big game changers.
Yeah. So just for some people who haven't heard of Vespa, do you want to just explain what that is?
Which the crossover?
No, well, you were talking about they were using Vespa.
Oh, Vespa. Okay, so Vespa is a naturally occurring product made of honey, propolis, royal jelly, and wasp extract. So they're all natural products, and they're actually the product is actually classified by the FDA as a food product. It's not a supplement. Yeah. Anyway, it's actually an accidental discovery of nature. And back in the 80s, some Japanese entomologists were studying the giant hornet, which is known as the murder hornet, the giant agent hornet. And they were tracking it, and they saw that this hornet could fly 60, 70, 100 kilometers a day. And it's the apex predator of the insect world. So it would kill prey, masticate it into a food ball, and then it would carry 1/3 of its weight back to the colony to feed to the larva. In exchange for the food, the larva fed it this peptide, this wasp extract peptide, that allowed it to access all the fatty acid that's stored in its thorax. So bees, ants, wasps, and termites all have that big, large part of their body in the back is their thorax. And it's basically a big sack of fatty acid. And they use this symbiotic relationship between the larva and the adult, where the adult feeds it food and the larva feeds it this peptide so that it can actually access that fat. And so these entomologists hypothesized that because animal cells on the cellular level, animal cells are remarkably similar across species. So they hypothesized that this cocktail of functional amino acids in a peptide molecular structure would exert the same sort of increase in fatty acid oxidation in mice and humans and other animals. So they tested it out first on mice and on humans, and sure enough, they saw this they saw increases in fat oxidation. They saw more stable glucose levels. So the glucose didn't go up and down, and then your lactate level went down. So you didn't have as much lactate load. So a lot of people call it lactic acid, but the proper term is lactate. Yeah. So that's how the Vespa was discovered. And then Mr. Kawahara developed the process for extracting that peptide and then mixing it in with the honey and the propolis and the royal jelly. And that's sort of like the honey is sort of a little bit of a starter, a glucose starter, so that it can get things going in the cells and really exert its force. And actually, there's some unpublished data that I didn't do. This was done by somebody else independently, and it's private data, but she tested a number of athletes of different diets, everything. And she saw anywhere from 0.5 gram increase in fat oxidation to a full gram a minute oxidation using Vespa.
Oh, okay.
So she would test them fasted, peak fat oxidation. Next day would come in fasted using Vespa, and anywhere, didn't matter what diet or anything, anywhere from it ranged between a half a gram a minute to all the way up to 1 full gram. Like Jeff Browning, one of the top ultra runners here in the United States at the age of 49, he was able to increase his fatty acid fat oxidation 0.9 grams. So almost a gram a minute.
And that's from using Vespa.
Just adding the Vespa. So he's recorded, this is unpublished, of course, but he's recorded 2.22 grams a minute, which is, if your peak fat oxidation is well over 2 grams a minute, that's a pretty significant game changer in terms of energy partitioning. And that's the whole thing with the whole program that I developed around Vespa, which is called Optimizing Fat Metabolism. Because, I, as a biologist, I thought of this from an evolutionary standpoint, in that, the reason we store a lot of fat is because that's what we're meant to burn aerobically. And we humans, with our modern ingenuity, have gotten it backwards, and that's not to say carbs don't have a place, but what we've done is overuse the carbs, and that overuse has caused a lot of the problems we're seeing today long term. And so I'm not against carbs. I'm not a keto person, like hardcore keto all the time. There's times and places where a more ketogenic type of macro makes sense, like in a recovery phase. But, if you're well adapted, we see that carbs play a very important performance role, but it's on top of that fat burning base.
So I've spoken with, a number of dietitians who recommend runners eat a high carbohydrate diet. Obviously not as high as it used to be, promoted, but, and like you said, you believe in optimizing fat metabolism. Can you explain the different viewpoints, like why you believe using high carbs is not necessarily better for performance?
Well, it's because there's a trade-off for using carbs. I mean, carbs provide a lot of energy, but when you optimize your fat metabolism, you actually can improve your carbohydrate utilization. One of the basic scientific facts that we see from faster study is that increase in crossover.
Yeah.
Okay. By moving from 65% to 80% of your VO2 max, and that you're in that sweet spot. When you're at 75% to 80% of your VO2 max, you're in that sweet spot of competitive endurance racing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So then you're sparing your glycogen and your glucose, plus your internal intake is less. You don't need to be trying to slam down 600 calories on the bike, or 300 calories on the run. You can get by just fine on, a lot less. So there's big trade-offs when you use a lot of carbohydrates, especially constantly. What they can show that there's a performance in a study, but then they're not looking at the downstream effects of oxidative stress, inflammation, lactate load, lactate clearing, the fact that when you burn more glucose, you're not burning as much fat. And this includes cholesterols, which cholesterols not only contain a lot of energy, but they contain all those important building blocks for mitochondria, cytoplasm, cell wall fatty acids. You're impairing the optimal thing of that. And then the inflammation thing is the biggest thing I see, because what I'm seeing is like vascular distensibility, your arteries, veins, capillaries. If they're inflamed, you can't move the blood, and thus you can't move the oxygen in and the CO2 out. So whether you're burning fat or you're burning carbohydrates, you're impairing being able to really fuel that engine, because there's a lot of inflammation. And when you look at the long-term studies, especially when you go from athletic studies to diabetes studies, heart disease studies, one of the hallmarks of this is this, what they call arterial distensibility. And the arteries of the heart get very stiff and hard. And this is where the whole, what I call the myth of salt. You know how they say you're supposed to watch your salt intake because of your blood pressure?
Yep.
It has nothing to do with the salt. It has to do with the fact that if your blood vessels are stiff, you add salt. If you add salt, you get thirsty, you add fluid. But if those pipes can't stretch and grow to accommodate that, the pressure goes through the roof. And what we see is exactly the opposite. When people get fat adapted and they get rid of that inflammation, they got to bring in a lot of salt to maintain plasma volume because sodium is what controls plasma volume, extracellular fluid, and potassium is the main driver of intracellular fluid levels. And so, because if you don't, you end up with one of the signs is what they call that keto flu, the wooziness, et cetera, the sluggishness, et cetera. And that's purely, it's not a function of the salt so much as the health of the cardiovasculature. And so the point I'm trying to make is, like, when you optimize your fat metabolism, you can actually do more on the carbohydrate end, because if you want to really push the high level, you're going to be able to push more oxygen in, CO2 out. You're going to be able to use less of your anaerobic spectrum, so you're not burning out. And then the long term, and then you got the long-term hormonal effects. The more carbs you do, the more insulin you're going to secrete. And then over time, that's going to create insulin sensitivity issues or insulin resistance. And the more you do that, the less you burn fat, the more inflammation you have, the less cholesterol metabolism you have. So the cholesterol starts to back up in your arteries or in your cardiovasculature instead of being metabolized the way it should. It's sort of a downward cascade. And so these are the backside issues that I've been looking at with with the carbohydrate thing that nobody's looking at. And it's like, what I've seen is, you save it for a hard training session or a race, you're not going to hurt yourself. And that actual pushing that the carbohydrates allow you to do actually signals to your body the adaptive stress you need to get stronger, to burn more fat, to better utilize the carbohydrates. Because, on the flip side, when you go into deep keto, you lose your ability to metabolize glucose because you downregulate your PDH pathway, which is that's one of the really signature things of a lot of Louise Burke's work, is how, deep keto downregulates PDH, which, there's a lot of merit to that. And that's one of the problems with deep keto is you can go all day, but you're just sort of stuck in second and third gear.
That's right. Yeah.
So you have to maintain that balance. You can maintain the PDH, but you can still improve your fat metabolism at the same time.
Yeah, because I was going to say that when you need to push for that little bit extra, that's when you're using carbs. So you're not saying not use any carbs in a race?
No, I actually have to push people to use carbs.
Yeah.
Because what we've seen, Isabel, is once you're adapted, your tolerance, if you're aerobically fit, like if you build your aerobic engine on a fat adapted physiology, that window of tolerance of carbs goes back to the old days, which I'll talk about here. I'm telling people to smash the carbs.
Yeah.
And forget about it on race day. And I actually tell most people on race day to stay away from fatty foods, unless it's an ultra endurance type of thing where they're not running maxed out. But if it's a race anywhere from an Ironman distance or 100K down, I want them to use carbohydrates that are easily digestible. But the fact is they use a lot less. I really have people focus more on hydration than anything else.
Yeah.
But they can use all the carbs they want.
Yeah. So if someone's fat adapted in this way that you're talking, rather than keto necessarily, you're finding they do still need less nutrition within a race as well.
They're doing what again?
They need less nutrition then in a race.
Yeah, and that's a big plus because there's this is another downstream issue, and I just cringe when I see coaches. There's some top coaches out there that recommend these high volumes of intake, and they said, well, if you can't tolerate it, you got to train your body to tolerate taking in more. Now that's another big thing where they're looking at, okay, you need to get in so many calories, but they don't look at what that's doing to their stomach and gut lining. And this is why over time athletes develop GI issues, because if you're exercising, it's like I tell people, if you're sitting down to a nice meal with your friends and you're really wanting to enjoy it, do you want to try and do a hard workout then? Of course not, right? So if you're doing a hard workout, do you want to try to eat a meal's worth of stuff? No. Because so here's what I'm seeing. And this is the thing, is they don't look at these things. They're just looking at what's in front of them. How many calories can we get in? How much performance can we get out? And if you're taking in all those calories, even if they're just carbs and simple sugars, you're creating a lot of oxidative stress at a time when the body is especially in the heat, the body's its allocation of resources. So it can't shunt as much blood to the digestive tract, and those epithelial cells that line your stomach and gut lining, those don't get the oxygen they really need to process digestion. So that sugar causes a lot of oxidative stress on very sensitive, high turnover cells. And so they're impacted by trying to digest at a time when they're not ready to digest. And then long-term, this causes, stomach and gut issues. It's going to, and because you're putting so much sugar there at that one point, it's going to cause the biome to shift towards more things, where you see a lot of athletes that if they've got any significant amount of candida in their biome mix, that starts to get out of balance with everything else, and you get candida overgrowth and die-off, and then that's going to add added stress to those epithelial cells that line your stomach, and that's where you get these stomach and guts that are just wrecked. And then you also get the problem with gallbladder issues, because if you're eating all the time and you're eating a lot of carbs, you don't get the proper gallbladder function.
Okay.
And then your bile ducts get clogged up, and that's why you see a lot of endurance athletes lose their gallbladders or have gallbladder issues.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. I work with oh God, what was her name? Can't remember. She I'll probably wake up tonight and think of it. But she was a top triathlete. She worked with Phil Maffetone and I in her last season, had the best season of her career, and she was with the US Olympics. And her last, she did PRs at Ironman Brazil. She just PR'd one after another. She had a bad Kona, but then she did another PR at Ironman Arizona at the very end. And so, but she had her gallbladder, and she said, and she was a medical doctor, but she had no idea that was the reason she lost her gallbladder, years and years of pumping carbohydrates.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the big problems. And so, like I say, I really cringe when they're telling people to eat more and train their gut to eat more, because it's in the long term, it's just not good.
So what about an athlete's day-to-day diet? Is that more where you're saying not so many carbs?
It depends. It's contextual. It's cycles. People want to think in these simplistic terms, like, okay, you got the keto camp here and you got the high carb camp here, and there's nothing in between. It's cycles. So what I recommend people do is use the carbs when you need them. Like if you're doing a high intensity interval tempo workout, you might want to have some carbs in the meal before you do that. Not necessarily snack right before your workout. But just bring some carbs in before, and maybe if you've got a big training load, you might want to refeed after, because when you're insulin sensitive, it's a good time, not immediately after, but when you have a meal after, because you don't need to eat right away when you're fat adapted. And then when you're in a more recovery phase, you want to go low carb. When I say low carb, the way we do it is we do it from a real foods, don't count your macros perspective, because non-starchy vegetables, I just tell people don't bother counting those.
Okay.
You can have as many as you want, because those are really great for filling you up and keeping you satiated without providing a lot of calories, providing a lot of electrolytes and fluid to keep you hydrated, but they fill you up so you're not eating too much fat, too much protein, and too many concentrated carbs, so you can get down to your race weight.
Yeah.
So that's how we do it. And then so you can have as many carbs as you want in the form of non-starchy veg, because you're going to fill up before you get it. And then the way your body digests non-starchy vegetables, it doesn't transit into your bloodstream as glucose the way a starch or a sugary product would. So
when you're saying non-starchy vegetables, are you're excluding though things like potatoes and sweet potatoes? And
sweet potatoes and potatoes are something you want to bring in, like say the night before the next morning you're going to do an interval workout. Well, yeah, you want to have a sweet potato as part of your meal, a portion. You don't want a carb load.
Yeah.
Right. And like what I wanted to say to you about this tolerance level is, when you look at the original carb loading studies in Sweden, it's really about context. And at the time, that was before Ansel Keys got going with the whole, the cholesterol hypothesis, the red meat, eggs are bad hypothesis. These were done in the late 50s, early 60s. I can't remember, in Sweden. And it was back in the time where everybody knew that athletes ate steak and eggs. They ate carbs, but they ate steak and eggs. So they were getting plenty of fat and protein. But those original carb loading studies, the subjects were young, competitive males, so high testosterone, which covers up a lot of sins.
Yeah.
And they were very competitive. And then what people don't know is they put them through a very mild carbohydrate restriction 2 weeks before, and then the 3-day carb load.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So if you're young and male and competitive and highly athletic, you're already pretty well fat adapted in that context, because before young males in that time ate a lot of protein. It was always known you ate a lot of protein back in those days. So they weren't eating a super high carb diet where they were eating 60 to 80% of their macro being pasta, bread, rice, right? And so they were eating a fair amount of protein, fair amount of carbs, and then they restricted their carbs, which means they took away probably the potatoes, the rice, pasta, and it wasn't a ketogenic diet per se, but it was restricted, and then they brought them back. And so that's not too far off of what we're doing. We're, on the more low carb days, we do bring it down to a very low carb level. It's not a super high fat level. That's another thing is my goal is not about making the food macro. My focus isn't on making the food macro super high fat. Okay. It's actually about getting the body to burn its own body fat, letting that fat flow so you can get the performance and stable energy you need to perform.
Yeah. And so if someone is choosing to start to go on this type of nutrition program, do they have to have a period of adaptation?
Yeah, we call that a metabolic reset, and it's that's where you really kind of want to be strict about keeping the carbs out, not so much going super high fat. That's for more sedentary people.
Okay.
If you're fairly athletic and fairly aerobically fit, you just need to restrict the carbs more than anything else. Yeah. And, like the protein, I like people to eat real food protein that you look at as food, not these whey shakes and pea protein shakes that are low fat, high synthetic protein, because the amino acid profiles don't add up. You gotta mix and blend them, and then they don't have a lot of fat in them. So a lot of that protein is being used for gluconeogenesis, and then the amine gets shunted to your kidneys, works your kidneys over. So you're wasting, it's not very efficient, right? It gives you that boost between the protein and the anabolic effects of the gluconeogenesis and the insulin load to bulk up, but it doesn't produces the type 2 anaerobic muscle, fast twitch muscle fiber instead of the aerobic. That's how come like weightlifters get a lot of build out of them, because they get that pump from the glycolysis, the gluconeogenesis, and then the subsequent burning of the glucose is a part of using those kind of products. So I say real food, like whole meats, not low fat meats, whole eggs, poultry with the skin on, fish, and then as much fat or oil as you want to make it taste good, right? To cook it in or make it taste good. Same thing with the veg. You put as much fat on it as to taste good, whether it's your salad dressing or butter or cheese. And then that makes it really simple, right? And that takes the stress out, which is a whole nother part of fat adaptation.
Yes. Because
I tell people stress is as big a issue as the concentrated carbs. So we'll go on to that later, but if you want to stay on the nutrition aspect of it, we'll finish up with that. But I don't want people stressing about their food.
What about people who, because the rhetoric has been for a long time that, too much meat is bad for you and too much fat is bad for you and will increase cholesterol levels and all that. And so it's an ingrained belief. What do you say to that? If people are,
this is something I've been trying to figure out for the last 20 years, Isabel, because something as elegantly simple as this little thing we call evolution. It shaped us to burn fat aerobically. That's why we, like I said, like that's why we carry a lot of fat. In fact, I tell people, like, females are hardwired biologically to eat and save for two.
Yeah.
That's why women can put on the fat and they don't give it up so easily unless everything gets just right. And it's because biologically they're meant to store that fat, because late gestation, childbirth, and lactation, that period of time, the woman's not very good at hunting and gathering, right?
Yeah.
And she's got to get that. This is just biology. It's not a political or
No. Yeah.
right. It's just biology. So she's got to get that next generation going, and she has to have that in case of not, you can't depend on the male to be along. You can't hunt and gather. You got to be autosufficient. So that's why women have this capability to put on a lot of weight. And then, because you need it for late gestation, childbirth, and then lactation, because milk is made from ketones, which get converted into cholesterol. Cholesterol is the major component of milk. And so, that's what people don't understand is like the hormonal settings is what triggers things. And I learned a lot of this from actually dairy nutrition, because I look at dairy cows as a super athlete, just the metric is milk production, but the whole lactation process is driven by cholesterol synthesis. And, so we're meant to burn fat, and even cows, even though they're herbivores and they're eating carbohydrates, because they're ruminants, the bacteria, fungi, and archaea in their rumen, their abdomen, is converting it into fatty acids. And so they get their energy, they're fat burners. They get most of their energy comes from fat.
Yeah. Yeah.
So taking it back to mammals are made to burn fat aerobically. And so that's the whole point, is our base physiology has to be fat. And then so our nutrition will alter what our physiology and metabolism will do depending on what we eat. And so if you're eating a lot of glucose or starch-based stuff, which starch is converted into glucose, because glucose is actually toxic in the blood once it gets above certain levels, your body has to burn it first. And that's why you get the insulin rush and over time. So, with cholesterol, so that stunts the cholesterol metabolism. So in the context, and this is the second paper that actually came out of Faster, I don't know if you've seen that paper, was noting how all the low carb diet cohort had high LDL cholesterol and high total cholesterol, because they're burning it. So their liver's putting out cholesterol, but it's also metabolizing it. So the context of that is, if your overall cholesterol is high, your LDLs are high, but your good HDL is okay, and your triglycerides are low, and your fasting insulin is low, that's a good thing. It means your body's metabolizing the cholesterol. Now, in the conventional sense, if you have high cholesterol, especially high LDL, it means it's backing up in your blood. It's not getting metabolized. It's getting deposited on those arterial linings, and it's the road to a heart attack. So that's hallmarked by high cholesterol, high triglycerides, and high insulin and low vitamin D. Yeah.
And so if someone's looking at adopting this and is, before performance means over and above, health and whatnot, what sort of performance gains can they expect to see from
Well, one of the biggest things is like you said, they have to get adapted, and they have to go through that reset phase. And then there's an adaptation phase of about 4 to 6 weeks, sometimes 8 weeks, where you're upregulating your hormonal and enzymatic pathways to really burn fat at a high level. And it's mainly beta oxidation, which is the base way we metabolize fat, where you're just cleaving off these long chain fatty acids. And then you've got ketosis, but you also have hepatic gluconeogenesis, where your liver will actually spare your glycogen and produce glucose from liver fat.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And that's not well known because most people aren't fat adapted. So your body can make this, make all it needs once it's got that adaptation phase to provide what you need for performance. And then you add that little bit of carbohydrate on top, and it's like rocket fuel. So, when you go through that first metabolic reset phase, you actually feel, okay, I'm not climbing the walls anymore. I can go longer, but I don't feel like I can perform like I used to. You have to go through that adaptation phase to get to where, oh, okay, I can perform like I used to, but I feel better and I recover better. And then you start adding the carbohydrates and tweaking it for your individual needs. That's where you get the performance boost. And that's where you see it's better, because one of the biggest things is the recovery, what people see as recovery. And I want to reframe that too, because everything about fat adaptation is got to be reframed, because it's different. Like, people notice they recover. And I think you're doing fat adaptation, right, Isabel? You're doing some format?
No. I mean, I used to a while ago before I did running, but yeah, I haven't for a while, to be honest.
Okay. So people notice the recovery aspects, right? That they recover faster. That recovery isn't actually because you actually recover faster per se. It's because you haven't done the damage in the first place of oxidative stress from burning glucose. So that quote unquote faster recovery is less damage, which means you can actually recover and handle a bigger training load. And that adaptive stress, instead of trying to get back up to baseline to repair the damage and get training effect, you're getting almost all training effect.
And you spoke earlier also about less inflammation. I'm guessing because of less oxidative stress, there'll be less inflammation within the body.
Yeah, right. Less oxidative stress from burning glucose, less lactate load from having to clear all the lactate, because lactate, your body, your heart, your kidneys, they can all use lactate, but it's rate limited. And once you exceed that rate, you start to accumulate lactate in the blood. So it's a proxy for glucose oxidation. So you got less lactate clearing issues, and then less inflammation. And when you have that inflammation, that creates a cascading effect. Like I was saying before, you get the inflammation, your arteries get stiff, you end up doing more glucose because you have less oxygen, so you can do less beta oxidation. Your cholesterol is backing up and trying to repair the inflamed arteries. It's a cascade effect, right? And it happens for well-conditioned athletes, it happens slowly over time, right? It's not something that it's like, oh, you have oxidative stress and it's like, boom, because they like, like when they're selling these antioxidant products, right? They make it sound like, oh, you got all these free radicals running around, they're killing you. And it's like, it's not quite that way. Yeah. So am I answering that?
Yeah, no, definitely. So I think a lot of people have trouble with the adaptation phase because they don't feel so good. So therefore they're concerned it's not working, I guess, or they just don't like having to go through that. So what would you say to help people?
Well, I think the first thing is people need to really bone up on it. They gotta wrap their head around it, because it's literally substance withdrawal.
Yes.
Because you're taking away the energy source your body's adapted to, and until the insulin goes down, you can't access the energy source you want to get to. So there's this really tough time, and so you have to know that. And then we've developed a lot of strategies around that, based on using Vespa, using hydration is really important. And then just making sure that you throttle back, like you train as much as you can or not train at all. Like there's people that can't get off the couch to people who may have a couple of 3 days of their training's not so great. That's the range. So the people who have trouble, they have to tell their partners and their people at work, look, I'm going to have a few days where I'm going to be grouchy and not very productive and all that. So you really have to prepare them for a lot of things. And then I think it's important that people commit so they can get through it. And like all of us endurance athletes know that when you do endurance stuff, there's going to be rough patches during your races, and you just got to know you got to get through them because you want to quit. And it's sort of like that, right? because you're going to hit those rough patches, and you got to kind of get educated, make that commitment towards the long haul. Because what I've seen is if they haven't quite gotten convinced, they got 1 foot in, 1 foot out, it's usually a mixed bag where they get results or not based on a whole bunch of variables. Whereas when I see people commit 100%, they get 100% of the time they get results.
Yeah.
It's just that kind of mindset.
And so then once you're adapted, you're saying that like before, a workout session, the night before, you might have some sweet potato or something. So there's room then once you're adapted for a little bit of carbs, and that doesn't put you back?
No, we find that the more you get aerobically fit, the bigger that window of carbohydrate tolerance gets, to where people don't even consider it a diet. It's crazy, Isabel, but if you do all the stuff we're doing, you get your vitamin D levels up, you get get on your magnesium, you practice what I call whole animal eating, which means you're either taking liver or liver supplements or heart, you're eating organ meat, and you're getting plenty of collagen rich foods or collagen supplementation, and get the nutrition balanced. I'm not worried about the nutrition density, because most athletes by definition want to eat healthy or clean. I hate it when they tell me I eat clean. I'm like, what does that mean? But if you just do the basics right, like whole animal eating is really important, because it makes the nutritional balance really easy. And that's why I'm not anti-vegetarian or anti-vegan. It's just, as you move away from that animal-based eating, it gets a little more complicated. You can do it, but it gets very complicated. I was going to
ask, is it possible for a vegan to be on this? I mean, I can sort of see how a vegetarian might be able to do it, but I think it'd be very hard for a vegan, wouldn't it?
Well, let's go with the vegetarians first. I've coached a couple of very high-level, middle-aged masters vegetarian athletes, and as soon as we get them their vitamin D levels up, they're very performance oriented, so they'll do the liver capsules and the gelatin capsules to get the collagen, but they're doing eggs or ovo-lacto.
Yeah.
What I've seen all the time with those people, and they're on the Vespa, their injuries go away and their performance goes through the roof. Just boom. With the vegans, it's theoretically possible, but in practice, it's really, really rough. It's hard because people need to really realize, just from a factual basis, that our digestive system evolutionarily is closer to a dog's than a pig's. Pigs and bears are like true omnivores.
Yeah.
And we're like an omnivorous carnivore. So it's like, you need to have those animal products. But one of the key things that I want to stress is, even though I'm advocating whole animal eating, so it's not just muscle meat, it's organ meat. Okay. Even though I'm advocating for that, what I found working with myself, with vegetarians and other high-end athletes, the amount you need when you get this right, in terms of the animal products, is surprisingly small.
Okay.
And that's what makes it sustainable. I mean, you got the vegans on one end, you got the carnivores on the other, in that other binary sphere, right? And the carnivores are eating, 2, 3, 4 pounds of meat a day, and, and all this. And it's like, I don't know what they're talking about, because it's like, as much as I like to occasionally pound a big steak, it's like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And it's not sustainable.
No.
So, but if people are looking for it from an ethical reason and an environmental reason, it's entirely aligned with natural evolutionary thing, because we're very efficient once we get that balance right. And the amount we need is so small, it becomes sustainable, especially if you're sourcing, grass fed. Like I use the grassland nutrition liver capsules that are out of Australia.
Okay. Yeah.
You know about those guys?
No.
Oh, we'll have to get you on that stuff. It's amazing stuff. But they source all their products out of the Channel country in the inland of Australia. And then they get the kelp out of the Tasman Sea. So it's like the most pristine stuff. And it all fits, because you've got to, I try to encourage people who are on the vegetarian vegan side of things is try to think, because vegans and vegetarians, they tend to be wanting natural, sustainable, environmentally, right? And then there's the ethical thing. And so if you look at it from a cycle of life, and where we fit in the food chain, if we're doing it sustainably and handling the animals well, it kind of fits in the whole ethics. And just from a medical standpoint, nutritional, hardcore nutritional standpoint in terms of human nutritional needs, it makes it easy because it's just hard to get the fat soluble vitamins and minerals, some of them, and the B vitamins you can't get, like B12, you have to supplement.
Yes.
K2, you can only get it from like natto. The EPA and DHA essential omega-3s, you have to have the seaweed based stuff. It makes it just very hard and complex, and it's almost impossible to get it, the amino acid profile in balance. The body will make it work, but is it optimal? No. Whereas eating that whole animal approach, it's real easy to dial it in and not have to eat a lot.
Yeah. Well, I guess, it's more nutrient dense and as well. So.
It's not just nutrient dense, it's also nutritionally balanced. That's the problem I have with like the carnivores. They tend to talk about organ meat, but they tend to do a lot of muscle meat.
Yes.
And that's a problem because you get too much methionine, and that leads to homocysteine, which leads to heart disease. And so you want to, you need the liver to balance out the methionine. Yeah.
I mean, personally, I was brought up on the whole animal diet, so I get that as well. Now, when someone is racing and you say they should be using carbohydrates, what should they be using within a race?
How much or what?
Sorry?
How much or what?
Well, like if you're saying it's okay to use carbs in a race, like what form would they be getting these carbs?
I have 3 simple rules, Isabel. It's what you like, what works, and what's available.
Yeah.
People get too stressed and OCD and too granular about their nutrition. And what do we all know? What can we all expect in an endurance event? Something's going to happen that we don't expect.
Yes.
You got to adapt.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I don't put those restrictions on people. Like, you and I both know a cup of Coke at the end of a race can be like magic. Right. So
you wouldn't drink that in normal life, but when you're running, it's awesome. Yeah.
Right. And so because you're not slamming, like you see these guys at triathlons where they got 20 gels taped to their crossbar of their bike, that's like suicide to me. You look at that and that's crazy. It's like, instead you're going to, like I've got high level people doing, 9 hour, 8.5, 9 hour Ironmans on like 900 to 1200 calories total.
Yeah.
Competitive level. I have one guy who's my size. So we're, I'm about 178 centimeters. So not a small guy. And he did a 100-mile race to second place in 15 hours, 13 minutes. So he's not a small guy, right?
Yeah.
Less than 500 calories in race to run 100 miles competitively. Okay. And he wasn't even hungry. He didn't eat till the next morning.
Jeez.
And that's what happens when you get and we've been having these discussions with athletes lately because I've had more and more of these athletes get this feeling in their long events or their long training where they get locked into that high fat burn. And as long as they're hydrated, they don't want or need much at all.
Yeah.
And then, so I advise people to use, like I say, whatever works for them and how much they need. Don't spare it, but you don't need to overdo it. Trust the system. Yeah. And then, like, I tell people to be strategic in their carbs, not like formulaic, because like if you're doing a long endurance event, you may want to start a feed when you get on the bike. Say you're doing an Ironman. What's your sport, Isabel?
Running.
Running.
Yeah.
What distance?
100 miles or more.
100 miles or more. Okay.
Yeah.
So for a 100-miler, you might want to have a feed in the morning while it's still cool. I tell people, okay, you might want to put in 100 to 150 calories an hour, but you wait till you get into a fat burn. So wait 90 minutes to 2.5 hours before you're just really locked into your internal metabolism's locked into the fat burn, right? And then you start a feed for a couple hours, but when it starts to warm, you want to shift away from a lot of food because you're starting to need to thermoregulate more, focus more on the hydration, which is as big a component. And then when it starts to cool off, you can bring the calories back in. And then of course, towards the end of a race, when fatigue sets in, cortisol goes up, you're burning more sugar. You're going to need more carbs. So it's kind of a moving target. Or if you've got a big climb coming up, 10 minutes, 15 minutes before when you're on the downhill, get a gel in your system, take a couple of salt pills, start drinking. So when you start hitting that hill 5 or 10 minutes later, that blood sugar rise is happening. So you have that extra blood sugar to burn off in the climb, and you want to hit it, or you've got a place where you want to throw down and go at a tempo pace. You want to, 5 or 10 minutes before, you want to take something. And I advise stuff that you find works for you, but also simpler sugars, just because they'll pass into the bloodstream with osmotic pressure rather than a lot of digestion, because you want to minimize the digestion, particularly if you're a runner.
Yeah. I mean, for myself, I just find I get hungry feeling, so I like to have some solid food as well.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing. If that's what works for you, that's a great thing. And I advise people I coach, like when they come to an aid station, an ultra, while you're getting your water bottles filled by the aid station workers and the volunteers, and you're just casually graze whatever you hit your fancy, because you may want something savory at that time, you might want something sweet. It's whatever looks good, but just have a little in the couple minutes you're there. Don't try to eat too much and then get going again.
That sounds like good advice.
And that's the thing, is like fat adaptation actually supports doing the carbs. Okay.
I guess in people's mind, when they hear fat adaptation, they just assume no carbs.
They go straight to keto. Everybody goes straight to keto because the keto camp has not done themselves favors, because they've sort of overreached in the performance benefits. There is performance benefits, but it doesn't mean no carbohydrates. Carbohydrates play a role as much as being able to be in ketosis.
Well, that's good to know, and I hope that's given everyone sort of a more balanced look at that kind of approach to nutrition. Now, as we're coming to the end, is there anything that I may have missed that you feel is important to discuss?
Well, I think people need to really educate themselves on this, because it is not a binary thing, and everybody's an individual. But the science is now there with faster, and we hope to be rolling out stuff. And I think people shouldn't get too, the science is a reference and helps us understand, but they should be looking at the real world results too. I think a lot of the scientists that are in the pro carb camp are banging on. The problem is the scientists are so focused on their spectrum of science. I'm doing this little thing here with you, that they don't see the thing. So you got the keto people saying how good keto is for performance. Then you got the high carb saying, no, keto doesn't work. You got to use a bunch of carbs. And it doesn't work that way. So, and I think vitamin D is a huge thing. Vitamin D, magnesium, unless you're doing something, proactively doing something, you're going to be suboptimal. And like I said before, the other big thing out there is the stress. You got to get the confidence and commitment to not be stressed and try to manage everything and become an intuitive athlete. Because that cortisol response it's going to make you a great sugar burner.
So why specifically vitamin D and magnesium? I mean, I personally take them myself, but a lot of people would say, well, I get vitamin D when I'm outside. Why specifically those vitamins and minerals?
Well, looking at it in the context of the modern man-made world, most people don't get outside daily in shorts, practically bearing a lot of skin, at least, for a few hours. Like you can go out for 15 or 20 minutes and get 10, 15, 20,000 IUs of vitamin D but if you got to expose your whole body, right, to midday sun. And you also have to have the cofactors that come from whole animal eating. Okay. And then the magnesium, oddly enough, magnesium is one of those things, especially in today's world. Sugar and stress deplete your magnesium. A lot of our foods now are not as magnesium rich. If somebody's eating a lot of seafood, they're probably okay on the magnesium status, but that's rare. And then the fact is that also, because we eat a lot of calcium rich stuff, because dairy is now a big part of our diet, I think that the calcium outcompetes for the magnesium because we have so
Okay.
much calcium in the we have so little magnesium, we have so much calcium that it's outcompeting. So you really have to be on top of the zinc is another one, but not so much. If you're having the liver and the muscle meat, you usually will get enough zinc. If you're having oysters regularly, you're definitely getting enough zinc, but magnesium and vitamin D are the two things. And I used to be like, try to get it from the sun or try to do tanning beds, but I've kind of gotten to the point where you just got to do the lanolin based vitamin D3. And we do it with liver capsules to get the vitamin A and vitamin K2 cofactors plus magnesium, because those three, vitamin A, vitamin K2, and magnesium are critical for proper vitamin D uptake.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is fat adaptation, because these are all fats.
So you take the liver capsules, but do you also eat this liver as well?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I take that. I love liver. I'll eat anything. Okay.
Yeah.
But
I'm a bit the same.
yeah, but I can't, if you were brought up on it, you know what I'm talking about, because I eat liver, but it's like, I tell people liver is like fish or worse. If it's not fresh or fresh frozen, and it's not cooked right, it's horrible. It's worse than bad fish, right?
Yeah.
But if you get good liver, it's to die for.
Yeah.
It
has. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's hard for me to have fresh liver around, because here in the States, it's not a regular part of the diet. I have an easier time coaching people in Latin America than I do because it's all the things that I want them to eat is part of their natural diet, or Asian diets, same thing.
Yes. Yeah.
All these things are just a natural part of the diet. And it used to be part of the European diet, but like I try to get people to eat tripe and joints, and that's a traditional food in any traditional culture, but it's you can't find it in like Australia or America.
No. Yeah. Well, my mum was European, so that's why I was eating all of that. Yeah. No, but I do agree.
Yeah. And that's, what, you should continue to eat that, because I'll tell you, the long-term benefits for your health and slowing that aging process down are huge. Just huge. Like before we go, one of the things I really push, you need very little organ meat, because it is so nutrient dense, almost too nutrient dense, like liver is almost too nutrient dense, but you need a lot of collagen, of the whole spectrum of collagen based stuff, tripe, skin tissue.
So tripe has a lot of collagen, does it?
Oh yeah. And the reason I'm saying this is because a third of the protein in our body is collagen. Yeah. And the thing is collagen proteins, our skin, our hair, our nails, our stomach lining, our endothelial cells, our ligaments, tendons, these are relatively high turnover cell structures. Yeah. So you need to really be eating a fair amount of that.
Is a supplement enough?
Look, that's a loaded question. Most people who are supplementing with collagen, the collagen supplements are mostly made from skin collagen, which is great. Yeah. But it's not the whole collagen. Like, I like people, like if people aren't going to do the collagen food, we get them on the cartilage, the type 2 cartilage collagen, because that's a very versatile collagen. Okay. It can go, it's almost like it's like the stem cell of collagen. So it can go in a whole bunch of different ways, because cartilage collagen is, like a precursor to bones. It can go into tendons. So, we put them on that. But that's the whole thing. Is like, I regularly eat what they call menudo con pata, which is a Mexican Latin American dish, which is tripe soup with the hoof or the joints in it. And I put a lot of lime juice in it, because that mixture of vitamin C and collagen is like a precursor for glutathione. Yeah. It's huge. It's just huge in terms of your health. Yeah. So I know I'm banging on a lot about it, but these are the things that your mom, if she was listening to it, would totally nod her head and say yes.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. And I mean, whole animal eating is really more efficient use of, if you're going to be eating.
It's more sustainable. Yeah. And like your mom would say, that's just how everybody eat. You didn't waste anything. Right. Exactly. I mean, you probably ate medulla, which is marrow.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, we ate everything. Yeah. We ate tripe.
Wonderful, or sweetbreads, or I'll eat all that stuff, Yeah. And so, it's like I try to. It sounds gross to most of your listeners, but it's like, gosh, you don't need to eat much of it, and when you get it prepared right, it's really actually quite delicious.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think the key is the preparation as well.
Yep.
All righty. Well, thank you so much. If people are interested in what we've been talking about, where can they find out more?
The product site is vespapower.com. And there's for Australia, we have vespapower.au, vespapower.com.au, I think.
Yeah.
So we have a small stock of Vespa in Australia. I'll make sure we'll get a 12-pack sent to you.
Cool. Excellent. Well, yeah, and I'll put those links in the show notes too.
And then for the content side, we're working on that, and that'll be coming along, but that's ofm.io.
Mm-hmm.
And I would suggest there's two things. We have two ebooks that I wrote. One is Beyond Keto, and that's beyondketo.info.
Yeah.
Then on the Vespa side at the bottom of the page, you can get the Conquering the Terrible Threes, which is all about how you can overcome bonking, stomach and gut issues, and bad recovery.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And they are the terrible three.
Yes.
Very much so.
Now, if you're in the endurance sphere, yeah, you kind of know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So that's where we can be found. Yeah.
Excellent.
And like I said, the stress thing is like, you can't burn fat if you're not like relaxed.
Yeah.
Like I said, you would be a great sugar burner if you're wound up.
Yep. And which almost refeeds the cycle as well. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's why it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Carbs work in that vein.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right.
Wonderful,
well, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And it's great to hear a different perspective on nutrition here today.
Yeah. There's a lot more than just nutrition. Like we just kind of touched the tip of the iceberg, because I think people they always go to the diet because that's what everybody's got you focused on. It's like diet is one thing. It's really about getting the individual, their physiology and everything set up right, and then using diet as one of those tools and levers to get it to that optimal physiology and metabolism, so that you can not only perform but be healthy and slow that aging process down.
And look, ultimately, that's what it's all about. Is it's health. I mean, performance is important, but I think that overarching health and like you said, slowing down the aging process is really something we should all be focusing a bit more on.
Well, and that's what we're seeing with this whole thing of fat metabolism is the more you're in beta oxidation, the slower the aging process. Like I've got all these athletes out there that are in their 50s, 60s, and even 70s that are doing incredible things. And I'm 61 and I still can go out on minimal calories and just go for hours hard. So, and that's the thing. It's like metabolically, we're all pretty young. And then there's a lot of stuff with the current situation, that current situation we've got.
Yes.
There's a lot of science coming out about how fat adaptation, vitamin D, all these things are what you need to be metabolically fit.
Well, I have heard that vitamin D and magnesium, once again, are excellent to help with that. Yeah.
Well, and here's a little basic biology on the physiology of RNA replication. And RNA replicates in your cells glycolytically. So if your cells are primed to burn glucose, which means you got insulin and your cells are sort of hormonally set up to burn glucose, you're inviting RNA in to replicate, whereas they're burning fat. It's not such a good environment. And there's a few studies now showing that people on a ketogenic diet actually have much better outcomes or don't have the really bad outcomes.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And hyperinsulinemia is one of the hallmark comorbidity issues.
Yeah.
And that means if you got high insulin, you're like programmed to burn sugar because you can't burn fat because high insulin prevents fat burn. So, and one of my athletes, she's a ICU doc and a trauma surgeon. She's been in New Jersey. So she's been on the front line of this, and she's kind of like angry because she says everybody here that's in the ICU it's not the current thing that's hurting them. It's the fact that they've already got a whole bunch going on.
Yeah.
And athletes aren't spared from this because that's the problem. If you're a sugar burner, you're just,
Yeah.
So,
So that's the thing. It's about health as well as performance. Yeah.
Right. And I would say that for most probably 98% of the athletes out there, the healthiest athlete, the metabolically healthiest athlete is also going to get the best performance. Now, if you're talking about Olympic marathoners, I would have to say in their peak block of training and their race, they're probably not at their healthiest.
No, yeah, I agree.
Because of what they have to do to get down a race, or a 10K runner. But I would say that in their build-up phase, getting them super healthy so that they can handle that big block of training, and then doing some triage to get them ready for, say, a marathon or a 10K will actually get them better performance. But there's, and they're going to be pushing a lot of carbs. There's just no way around it.
Yeah, that's right.
But being fat adapted, they can actually weather the stresses better.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah, definitely makes sense.
Yeah.
All righty.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.